A billionaire took a quick bite of his sandwich in Central Park, until he noticed 4 hungry kids silently watching every bite. When he offered it to them, one whispered, "Mom said to wait here for Dad." That single sentence shattered his world, and changed his life forever. Before we begin, leave a comment below and let us know where you are watching from so we can say hello. Now, let's get into the story. The sharp crunch of autumn leaves beneath polished shoes followed Trevor Langston as he stepped onto the path winding through Central Park. The October chill nipped at his tailored navy suit, but he didn't care. His head throbbed from hours in back-to-back meetings, and the lukewarm coffee he'd chugged earlier had done little to clear his mind. All he wanted was 5 quiet minutes and a bite to eat. He spotted a wooden bench near the edge of the walking trail, worn, weathered, and blessedly unoccupied. With a relieved sigh, Trevor sat, loosened his tie, and unwrapped the sandwich he'd picked up from the deli near his office. He barely noticed what kind it was: turkey, maybe ham. He just needed something in his stomach before he headed back into the whirlwind of mergers and property negotiations. The city buzzed around him, horns, footsteps, distant laughter, but in that sliver of solitude, he took his first bite, eyes half closed. Then he felt it. A strange tension. The undeniable sensation of being watched. He looked up. Across the pathway, barely 10 feet away, stood 4 children, dirty, thin, and silent. 2 boys and 2 little girls. The oldest, a boy who looked about 10, had a protective arm in front of the others, his sharp brown eyes fixed on Trevor's sandwich. Beside him stood another boy, slightly smaller, maybe 8, with tousled blonde curls and a nervous glance that flickered between Trevor's face and the food in his hand. But it was the 2 youngest, twin girls around 5 years old, that struck him the hardest. They clung to each other, their small faces streaked with dirt, their matching dresses rumpled and faded. One had her thumb in her mouth. The other was visibly shivering. They didn't speak. They didn't beg. But their eyes followed every movement he made, every bite he took, like it was the most important thing in the world. Trevor froze mid-chew. Something about their stillness, the restraint, the waiting, tore straight through his carefully built emotional walls. They weren't panhandling. They weren't performing. They were just hungry. Deeply, achingly hungry. Not just for food, but for care. For attention. For someone to see them. And now he did. He couldn't look away. His sandwich felt heavy in his hands, suddenly too large, too indulgent. He glanced at the eldest boy again, the one who stood straight despite the cold, like he had been forced to grow up far too quickly. That must be Ethan, Trevor thought. The way he shielded the others said everything. The younger boy, Lewis, maybe, held one of the twins' hands, trying to warm it with his own. Ami and Eva, he'd later learn their names were. Trevor's heart pounded. He had made more money than he could ever spend, but in that moment, all the wealth in the world felt meaningless against 4 pairs of starving eyes watching him eat. He stood up slowly, sandwich still in hand, and took a step toward them. "Are you kids hungry?" he asked, his voice more uncertain than he expected. Ethan didn't speak. He simply nodded, once, firmly. And everything in Trevor Langston's life changed. He walked over to them, knelt down, and held out the sandwich. "Here. You can have it." Lewis hesitated, but hunger overpowered fear. He reached out with trembling hands and took the sandwich carefully, as though it were made of glass. Trevor noticed the boy's fingers were dirty and ice-cold despite the late morning sun. Lewis turned and split the sandwich into uneven pieces, giving the twins their share and handing the biggest piece to Ethan. Trevor was about to say something, he didn't even know what, when Ami, one of the twins, whispered something so soft he barely caught it. "Mom said to wait here for Dad." It was a simple sentence. Just 8 words. But Trevor felt like the ground beneath him shifted. "What did you say, sweetheart?" he asked, his voice cracking. Ami looked up at him with wide, innocent eyes and repeated, a little louder this time, Mom said we should wait here. For Dad. She said he'd come. Trevor's chest tightened. He stared at the four children, suddenly seeing not just hunger but hope. Fragile, misplaced hope. The kind that parents give their kids when they're trying to hold everything together. The kind built on desperation, not certainty. He looked around the park, at the bench they must have called home for the past few days. For small bodies waiting for someone who might never show up. Trevor blinked quickly, fighting off a sudden burn in his eyes. How long had they been waiting? And where was their mother now? Those 8 words, spoken by a 5-year-old girl with peanut butter on her chin and shoes that didn't match, hit him harder than any boardroom betrayal ever had. He couldn't walk away. Not now. Not after this. Trevor slowly knelt down on the damp grass, bringing himself eye level with the children. The 4 of them stood close together, thin, smudged with dirt, and visibly exhausted. His designer suit creased at the knees, but he didn't care. Something about the way they stood, protective of each other, eyes wide but silent, pierced through every wall he'd ever built around his heart. He softened his voice. "Where's your mom?" The tallest boy, about 10, stepped forward. He had tousled brown hair and eyes that tried hard to be brave. "I'm Ethan," he said quietly. "This is my brother Louis," he nodded to a smaller boy standing just behind him, clinging to his hand, "and our sisters Ami and Eva." The twins, identical in every way down to their worn-out pink sneakers, peeked out shyly from behind Louis. Trevor gave a gentle smile. "Nice to meet you, Ethan. Can you tell me where your mom is?" Ethan glanced down, his shoulders tightening. "She left a few days ago, said she was going to find Dad. She told us to stay here, and wait." The words hit Trevor like a punch to the chest. "She told you to wait here? For how long?" I don't know," Ethan said, voice breaking just slightly. "She said it wouldn't be long. But it's been 3 nights already. We sleep over there, near the bushes. We take turns watching." Trevor's gaze followed where Ethan pointed. A small patch of flattened grass near a tree trunk, partially hidden. No shelter. No blankets. He felt his throat tighten. "Have you seen her since then?" Ethan shook his head. "Did she take a phone with her?" Louis spoke for the first time, voice nearly a whisper. "She dropped it. It broke. She didn't want to take it anymore." Trevor looked at them, 4 small children abandoned in the middle of the city, clinging to a promise that someone would come back. He saw how Louis kept glancing at the street like he expected someone to appear at any moment. He saw how Ami and Eva held hands tightly, too scared to speak. He saw how Ethan, just a child himself, was trying so hard to be a grown-up for the sake of his siblings. His heart ached. What kind of mother tells 4 kids to wait in a park and disappears? But he didn't voice that thought. Not yet. Not in front of them. Instead, he placed a gentle hand on Ethan's shoulder. "You've been very brave. All of you." Ethan blinked rapidly and nodded, trying to hold back tears. Trevor Langston held his breath as he knelt down beside Ami and Eva, the 2 youngest children. He looked directly into the eyes of the boy who appeared to be the oldest. "What about the past few days?" Trevor asked gently. "What have you been eating?" Ethan, 10 years old, looked down at the cracked sidewalk beneath his shoes. His little brother Louis, only 8, pressed his lips tightly together, saying nothing. The 2 little girls, Ami and Eva, stood close behind them, one clutching the other's hand like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. They all wore second-hand clothes, torn at the cuffs and stained in places no wash could fix. Ethan finally lifted his head, his voice steady but hollow. "We didn't have anything." Trevor's brows pulled together. "Nothing?" "Sometimes," Ethan said, his tone so flat it frightened Trevor, we look in the garbage cans. When people throw food away, we wait until they leave, and we check if there's something not too gross. Like fries. Or a sandwich someone didn't finish. If it's not all soggy. Trevor's heart twisted inside his chest. Louis added, whispering as if ashamed, once someone threw away a half-eaten pretzel, we shared it. Behind them, Ami tugged at Eva's sleeve and murmured, I didn't like the smell in that trash can. Eva nodded, whispering, but you still ate it. Those soft, fragile voices, trying so hard to stay strong, made Trevor feel like the ground had shifted beneath him. He had spent his life in penthouse suites, with polished silver cutlery and hot meals he didn't always finish. He had never once thought about what it felt like to pick food out of a garbage bin. Now, looking at these 4 children, hungry, tired, and far too quiet, he couldn't stop the ache in his chest. Trevor swallowed hard. He felt the weight of the moment settle in his bones. This wasn't just an act of kindness anymore. It wasn't about one sandwich or one day. These kids had survived 3 days on trash and silence, waiting for a mother who hadn't come back. And he had nearly walked past them. But not anymore. Trevor took a shaky breath and whispered to himself, this is not okay. This is not how it ends for them. He rose to his feet, voice steady now, and looked down at Ethan. Come on, he said gently. Let's get you something real to eat. No more trash. Not ever again. And just like that, the first thread of a new chapter began to weave. Trevor's fingers tightened around his phone. His mind, trained to make billion-dollar decisions in seconds, now struggled to compute what he was seeing. Mom said to wait here for Dad, the twins' soft echo still rang in his ears. He couldn't ignore it. He wouldn't ignore it. Snapping out of his thoughts, he pulled his phone from his coat pocket and quickly dialed. Amanda, he said, his voice lower and more serious than usual. Cancel my next meeting. Something's come up. I'll explain later. He didn't wait for questions. As the line disconnected, he took a slow breath and approached the children with a gentleness that surprised even him. I'm Trevor, he said, kneeling so he could meet their eyes without towering over them. I know you don't know me, but how about we find something warm to eat? Somewhere safe. Then we'll try to find your mom together. I promise. Ethan hesitated. Louis looked to him, waiting for a sign. It was Ami, her voice a faint whisper, who finally said, will there be soup? Trevor felt something crack inside his chest. Yes. Warm soup. And bread. And maybe hot chocolate, if you'd like. Ethan finally gave a slow nod, and Trevor stood, offering his hand. One by one, the kids stepped forward. Ethan took his siblings' hands, and together they followed this stranger, who didn't feel so strange anymore. As they walked down the path toward the street, the sharp wind blew through the trees. Trevor looked down at the small figures beside him and realized something he hadn't in years: not every deal worth making comes with contracts. Some start with a single, unspoken promise on a cold park bench. And so began a search, not just for a missing mother, but for something deeper Trevor hadn't known he was missing, a reason to care again. At a modest diner just off the corner of 62nd Street, the warmth inside was a sharp contrast to the cool spring air outside. The scent of sizzling bacon, melted cheese, and toasted bread wrapped around Trevor Langston the moment he stepped in, but it wasn't the food that held his attention, it was the 4 small children seated around the booth. Ethan, 10 years old, sat closest to the window, his little brother Louis beside him. Across from them, the twin girls, Ami and Eva, only 5, shared a plate, their tiny hands moving quickly as they picked up fries and small bites of grilled cheese. They didn't speak much. The only sounds were the scrape of utensils on plates and soft chewing. It was clear they weren't trying to be polite, they were just too hungry. Trevor sat across from them, not touching his food. He watched in silence, his heart unexpectedly gripped. The way Louis clutched his sandwich with both hands, eyes darting as if afraid someone might take it. The way Eva gave Ami the bigger half of a torn piece of bread without hesitation. There was no whining, no fighting, just survival, carried out in quiet gestures and instinctive love. He had seen hunger before, in statistics, in reports from his foundation's outreach teams, but never like this. Never this real. Never this close. These weren't just numbers. These were children. Kids who should be worrying about cartoons and scraped knees, not waiting in public parks for a mother who hadn't come back. Trevor leaned back, a strange tightness building in his chest. He had closed deals that reshaped the skyline. He had flown across continents to broker multi-billion-dollar mergers. He had been featured on magazine covers, hailed as one of the youngest and sharpest minds in American business. But none of those moments had left him feeling this humbled. None of them had cracked his armor the way the sight of these 4 kids devouring a hot meal did. Not once in all his years had he stopped to realize how easy it was to be born into safety and how cruel the world could be to those who weren't. And yet, despite everything, they still shared. Still smiled. Still thanked the waitress with soft voices as she refilled their water glasses. Trevor lowered his gaze, unsure whether it was admiration or heartbreak rising inside him, or both. He had thought he was doing a good deed. Buying a sandwich. Offering a warm meal. But he was beginning to see that this moment wasn't about charity. It was about awakening. He didn't know exactly what would come next. But one thing was certain, he couldn't walk away. Not from Ethan, not from Louis, not from Ami and Eva. Not from this. Trevor sat quietly at the corner booth of the diner, stirring his untouched coffee as the children devoured their meals. The air smelled of fries and warm bread, but all he could focus on were the 4 small figures before him: Ethan, the eldest at 10, protective and composed; Louis, just 8, softer-spoken and alert; and the identical 5-year-old girls, Ami and Eva, who leaned into each other with every spoonful like they shared one heartbeat. Between bites of grilled cheese and sips of lukewarm soup, Ethan finally looked up. His eyes, a haunting blend of caution and maturity far beyond his years, met Trevor's. "Our mom's name is Rachel," he said quietly. His voice cracked, not from fear, but from the strain of holding it all together for too long. "She used to work at a diner back home. We had a place. It wasn't big, but it was ours." Trevor leaned in, careful not to interrupt. Louis wiped his mouth with a napkin, and added, "Then our dad, he just didn't come home one day. He left for work and never came back." Ethan nodded. "Mom called the police, tried everything. Nothing. It was like he disappeared." Ami and Eva had stopped eating, listening intently as if they were learning parts of the story for the first time too. One of them, Trevor couldn't yet tell who was who, whispered, "Mom cried a lot. But she still smiled at us." Ethan swallowed hard. "After a while, she lost her job. She said we couldn't afford the rent anymore. So she packed what we had, and we got on a bus. She told us maybe Dad was in Manhattan, that maybe he had a reason. That he'd be looking for us too." Trevor's chest tightened. Every word painted a darker picture of resilience stretched to its limit. "Did she have a plan?" he asked gently. Louis shrugged. "She said she'd find work. And she did, for a little while. But then she got sick. She couldn't get up some days." Ethan looked down at his now empty plate. "Last week, she told us to wait in the park while she looked for our dad. She said she'd be right back." Trevor clenched his hands under the table. That was days ago. He glanced at the 4 of them, Ethan trying to be brave, Louis carrying quiet guilt, and the 2 little girls who looked like they still believed in fairy tales. These weren't just hungry kids. They were abandoned hearts tethered to a promise made by a mother who had run out of options. And now they were his to protect. "Thank you for telling me," Trevor said softly, his voice catching. We'll find your mom. I promise. And for the first time, Ethan let out a shaky breath, as if someone had finally told him he didn't have to be the grown-up anymore. Trevor reached for his coffee, but his hand paused mid-air. The words one of them had whispered back in the park echoed in his mind. Mom said to wait here for Dad. It was such a simple sentence, yet it had the weight of 1,000 storms. It made him question everything he had once believed about his place in the world and what he owed to it. He had told himself he was just helping them get a meal, nothing more. But now, watching them eat, watching Ethan gently cut a piece of pancake in half for his little sisters, Trevor felt a foreign tightness in his chest. This wasn't just pity, it was something deeper. Something fierce. For so long, he had lived in glass towers above the streets, untouched by the struggles below. His world was curated, ordered, predictable. But these children didn't fit into spreadsheets or schedules. They were real. Fragile. Abandoned. And something in him refused to let that be the end of their story. As Eva accidentally knocked over her juice, scrambling with wide, apologetic eyes, Trevor quickly reached for a napkin and cleaned it up before she could cry. "It's okay, sweetheart," he said softly, his voice gentler than he'd heard it in years. She blinked up at him in surprise. He sat back and exhaled slowly. His mind told him to call social services, to hand them over to the right authorities. But his heart, the one part of himself he'd locked away long ago, was screaming no. Trevor Langston, the man who never got involved, was already involved. The walls he'd built inside himself were starting to crumble. He didn't know exactly what he was going to do next. But one thing was clear. He couldn't leave these kids behind. Not now. Not ever. Trevor Langston stood in the grand marble entryway of his Upper West Side penthouse, gripping his keycard a moment longer than necessary. Behind him stood 4 children, Ethan, 10, Louis, 8, and the 5-year-old twin girls, Ami and Eva. They were all staring up, their tired eyes wide at the sheer height of the ceiling and the endless windows that looked out over the city. The sun had long dipped below the skyline, leaving the apartment bathed in a sterile glow from recessed lighting, bouncing coldly off the glass and steel. He hesitated. For years, this space had been a monument to success, high-end, minimal, designed by professionals, curated down to the color of the vases and the scent of the diffuser. But in all that time, it had never felt like a home. It was a place to sleep, to take meetings, to overlook the world from a safe, high distance. Bringing children here felt like bringing light into a cave. The elevator chimed softly behind them, and the twins flinched. "It's okay," Trevor said gently, turning to them with a half-smile. "It's just the elevator." Ethan nodded solemnly, taking Ami's hand while Louis held onto Eva's. The older boys were trying to be brave, for themselves, and for the girls. Their shoes were scuffed. Their jackets too thin for the season. Trevor noticed Ethan still wore a frayed backpack, zipped tightly as if it held everything important in his world. Maybe it did. "You must be tired," Trevor said, kneeling slightly so he didn't tower over them. "Let's get you washed up and into something warm." They nodded, too polite or too exhausted to ask questions. He led them inside. The heat from the central system kicked in, but it couldn't cut through the emotional cold that still lingered in the air. Yet something shifted, subtle at first. The silence that had always dominated the penthouse was replaced by the soft shuffle of small footsteps, the quiet hums of curiosity as Eva gently touched the corner of a plush chair and Ami stood on tiptoes to peek at a tall vase near the window. Trevor showed them the guest room, an oversized suite with 2 queen beds and an adjacent bathroom. "I'll get you some clean clothes," he said, already texting his assistant to send over pajamas and essentials. In the meantime, he found an old hoodie and a t-shirt in his own closet, laying them out for the boys. For the girls, he folded 2 cashmere sweaters, hoping the softness would bring some comfort. Later, after warm baths and changing into oversized clothes that hung adorably from their small frames, the four children sat on the large L-shaped couch in the living room. They had eaten their fill at the diner, but Trevor brought out a plate of crackers and fruit anyway, placing it on the coffee table without a word. Then came the laughter. It began with Eva accidentally knocking over a decorative pillow. Ami tried to catch it, tripped, and collapsed into giggles. Louis joined in, making a game out of it, tossing the pillow gently across the room while pretending to be a baseball announcer. Ethan, who had remained quiet all evening, finally cracked a smile. Trevor watched, stunned, as the boy who had been guarding his siblings with soldier-like seriousness now leaned back and let out a breath of relief. The penthouse echoed with the one sound it had never known before, joy. Crumbs from crackers littered the expensive marble flooring. One of the girls left a damp trail of small footprints across the hallway after her bath. A pillow lay crumpled under a coffee table. And somehow, Trevor didn't mind. In fact, he found himself sitting on the floor with them, his suit jacket removed, sleeves rolled up, chuckling at Louis's impersonation of a royal butler serving grapes. "These are fancy grapes," Louis said in a fake British accent, holding one up like it was a diamond. "Only for guests of the royal palace." "I'm a princess," Ami said, sitting cross-legged and raising her hands high. "I'm a warrior princess," Eva added, jumping up with a grape stem as her pretend sword. Trevor laughed. It wasn't a polite chuckle. It was a real laugh, the kind that hadn't escaped his lips in years. His heart felt something it hadn't in a long time, warmth. As the hour grew late, the children began to yawn. Trevor helped them settle into bed, pulling the plush comforters up to their chins. Ami clung to a stuffed bear he had found in an old gift basket from years ago. Eva fell asleep holding her sister's hand. Louis curled on his side like a cat, and Ethan lay on his back, eyes open for a long while. Trevor sat on the edge of the bed. "You okay?" he asked softly. Ethan nodded, then, after a pause, whispered, "Thank you for not leaving us there." Trevor felt something tighten in his chest. "I couldn't. Most people do." Trevor had no answer for that. Instead, he reached out and gently squeezed Ethan's hand. "Sleep now. You're safe." He walked back into the living room and sank onto the couch. The room was quiet again, but not the lonely silence he knew. It was peaceful now, filled with invisible traces of four sleeping children, of joy that had never touched this place before. Trevor looked out over the city, the skyline lit up like a galaxy of stars. He had spent his life building towers and chasing power. But nothing, not the luxury, not the acclaim, had ever filled the hollowness he carried. Until tonight. Until crumbs on the floor. Laughter echoing in a cold room. For small lives who didn't ask for anything, only safety and kindness. And in giving it, Trevor Langston finally found something real. Trevor Langston stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of his penthouse, the city stretching out below like a maze of blinking lights and sleepless urgency. His hand trembled slightly as he held his phone, staring at the screen as if waiting for it to decide the right thing to do. On the plush couch behind him, four children slept, curled like kittens, their small bodies finally at rest after what must have felt like endless days of uncertainty and cold. He hadn't planned for this. Trevor wasn't a father. He wasn't even an uncle. His world was forged from glass towers and concrete deals, not crayon drawings and whispered fears in the dark. And yet, tonight, his home was filled with both. The children's names echoed in his mind: Ethan, the 10-year-old boy who tried to act older than his years, shielding the younger ones with quiet authority. Louis, 8, soft-spoken and observant, who barely said a word at dinner but watched Trevor like he was trying to decide whether to trust him. Then there were the twins, Ami and Eva, 5-year-old girls with matching tangled curls and eyes too wide, too knowing for their age. They clung to each other even in sleep, their tiny fists locked together like a promise not to let go. Trevor turned away from the window, jaw clenched. He couldn't sleep knowing their mother might be lying in a hospital bed, or worse, out there somewhere. He pulled up a contact from deep in his list, Frank DeLuca, a former NYPD detective turned private investigator. A man Trevor had used in the past for background checks and discreet inquiries, but never something like this. He hit dial. "Trevor? That you?" Frank's gravelly voice came through almost immediately. "Yeah. I need your help," Trevor said, voice low. "This isn't business-related. It's personal." There was a pause. "Go ahead." Trevor exhaled. "I need you to find a woman. Her name is Rachel Hartman. Mid-30s. She has 4 kids, Ethan, Louis, Ami, and Eva. They were abandoned, or maybe left temporarily, in Central Park. She told them to wait there for her, and she never came back. That was 2 days ago." Another silence. Frank's voice was cautious now. "You're telling me 4 kids were living in Central Park for 2 days? They weren't begging. Just waiting. Watching strangers. Hoping their mom would come back. I found them this afternoon." "You found them?" "Yes," Trevor said. "They're asleep in my living room right now." Frank gave a low whistle. "All right. I'll start with local hospitals, shelters, precincts. Maybe she collapsed somewhere. If she gave a name, I'll find her. Can you text me the kids' names, her name, and any details?" "I will," Trevor said. "Frank, make this fast. Please." "I will. And Trev, good on you." Trevor ended the call and immediately followed up with a text, including what little he'd gathered from the kids, that Rachel had been searching for their father in Manhattan, that she was unemployed, and that she hadn't meant to abandon them, only asked them to wait while she looked for help. He set the phone down and looked back toward the sleeping children. Ethan's arm was protectively flung over Louis, and the twins were curled up at their feet, still holding hands. A lump formed in Trevor's throat. He couldn't imagine the desperation Rachel must have felt to leave them like that. Still, something inside him whispered that even if she was well-intentioned, what if she couldn't come back? What if something had happened? He needed a backup plan. Trevor walked to his study, shutting the door quietly behind him. He picked up the landline, one he rarely used, and dialed another number, this one to Child Protective Services. New York CPS hotline. "How can I help you?" a woman's voice answered, professional but kind. "This is confidential," Trevor began. "My name is Trevor Langston. I've temporarily taken in 4 children I found in Central Park today. Their mother told them to wait, and she hasn't returned. I'm working to locate her through a private investigator, but I need to understand what my emergency options are in case she can't be found." There was a pause, then the woman said gently, "You're not legally their guardian, correct?" "Not yet. But they are safe. I've given them food, shelter. I just don't want to risk losing them to the system before I know more. I need time." The woman's tone softened. "It sounds like you care about these children." "I didn't plan to," Trevor admitted. "But they're sleeping in the next room, and I'm not going to pretend they don't matter." "All right, Mr. Langston. If you're willing to file for temporary custody, there are emergency provisions we can help you with, especially if the mother's status remains unknown. We can also help place the children together if needed, but since they're already with you, that's in their best interest for now. May I send you the emergency custody forms by email?" "Yes, please," he said. "Send everything." As he gave his email address, Trevor felt the weight of a new kind of responsibility settle over him. These children, these 4 fragile lives, had landed in his lap without warning, and now the choices he made would shape their future. He'd handled corporate mergers, multi-million-dollar lawsuits, even hostile takeovers. But this was different. By the time he hung up, the email was already in his inbox. Legal jargon. Emergency clauses. Signatures. Requirements for background checks, home inspections, medical records. It would be a process. But he wasn't backing down. Trevor closed the laptop and returned to the living room. He stood over the children, listening to the soft rhythm of their breaths. They hadn't stirred since falling asleep, probably the first deep rest they'd had in days. He pulled a blanket off the armchair and gently draped it over the twins. Eva murmured something in her sleep, and Ami shifted, pressing her cheek into her sister's shoulder. Trevor knelt beside them for a long moment, his hand hovering protectively over their small forms. Whatever happened next, whether Rachel was found or not, he had made a silent promise tonight. He would not let them go back to the cold, the hunger, the fear. Not while he could do something about it. Not while they were under his roof. Not while they believed he could be the one to help them wait, for a mother who might return, or for a future they never imagined. The penthouse was quieter than usual that night, yet somehow it felt fuller than it ever had. The hum of the air conditioning blended with the soft sound of 4 steady breaths. Trevor Langston stood at the doorway of the guest room, his tie loosened, shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows, and his expensive watch removed, forgotten on the marble counter. His eyes remained fixed on the small scene before him. He leaned his shoulder against the doorframe and sighed. Not out of fatigue, but memory. He hadn't been much older than Ethan when he learned that his presence in the grand halls of his family's mansion was more an inconvenience than a joy. His father, powerful and calculating, had considered emotions a weakness, something to be disciplined out of a child. There had been no bedtime stories. No soft reassurances during thunderstorms. Just cold corridors, distant footsteps, and the occasional pat on the head during press events. It had been the nannies who fed him. The tutors who corrected him. The housekeepers who occasionally smiled. But none of them stayed for long. They came and went, like hotel guests. And every time one left, Trevor was reminded of his own disposability. He used to hold a pillow like that too, tight against his chest when the silence became unbearable. He would bury his face into it, crying into the fabric, muffling the sound so no one would hear. Not that it mattered. No one ever came. The memories came back like fog creeping over water, silent and impossible to stop. The next morning, just as the sun began to cast its golden hue over the skyline of Manhattan, Trevor Langston sat in his penthouse kitchen nursing a strong cup of black coffee. He hadn't slept much. The weight of the previous day, finding 4 homeless children in a park, bringing them home, watching them sleep on his couches wrapped in blankets like fragile bundles of trust, was still heavy on his chest. He stared at his phone on the table, waiting for it to ring. As if on cue, it buzzed. Trevor snatched it up. The name on the screen read, Cal Murray, Private Investigator. He answered immediately. "Tell me you found something." Cal's voice came through, gruff but calm. "Yeah. I did. I think we've got her." Trevor stood up so suddenly his chair nearly toppled. "Where is she?" "There's a woman named Rachel Hartman. She was admitted to Bellevue Hospital 3 days ago. Collapsed on the sidewalk, dehydration, malnourished, serious exhaustion. The ER staff said she was barely conscious when she came in." Trevor ran a hand through his hair. 3 days ago. That means the kids were left in the park all this time. "Yeah," Cal confirmed, voice low. According to the hospital intake notes, she gave the names of her children, Ethan, Louis, Ami, and Eva. She tried to explain, but the doctors said she passed out mid-sentence. She hasn't had the strength to follow up since. Trevor closed his eyes and exhaled slowly, a quiet storm brewing in his chest. "Is she still there?" "Yeah. Room 312, Internal Medicine Wing. She's stable now, but weak. Looks like she didn't have anyone to call. No ID. Just clung to her kids' names." Trevor didn't hesitate. "I'm going there. Now." By 8:15 a.m., Trevor was walking briskly down the sterile white corridor of Bellevue Hospital, his polished shoes tapping a rapid rhythm against the tile floor. His heart pounded harder with every step. He didn't know what he expected. He didn't even know this woman. And yet, it felt as if the future of those 4 kids, Ethan with his steady protectiveness, Louis and his quick tears, and the 2 delicate twins, Ami and Eva, always clinging to one another, was tied to whatever he would find behind that door. Room 312. He paused before entering, straightened his tie out of instinct, and knocked gently. A nurse inside looked up and nodded to him. "You're here for Miss Hartman?" "Yes," Trevor said, his voice quieter than usual. "I brought in her children. They were waiting in the park." The nurse stepped aside and let him in. "She's conscious, but still weak. You can speak to her, but gently." Trevor approached the bed. Rachel Hartman looked far older than her 32 years. Her cheeks were hollow, her skin pale, and her eyes, sunken but aware, drifted slowly toward him. She looked confused at first, then wary. "Are you a doctor?" she asked, her voice dry and cracked. Trevor shook his head. "No. My name is Trevor Langston. I found your children, Ethan, Louis, Ami, and Eva. They were in Central Park." Rachel's lips trembled. "You found them? They're safe?" "They're safe," Trevor said, voice catching slightly. "They were waiting just like you told them. Ethan wouldn't let them leave the bench." Tears streamed down her face as she let out a gasp of relief. "Oh, thank God. I was so scared. I told them to stay put. I didn't know I'd be gone so long. I passed out. I couldn't get to them." Trevor took a seat beside the bed. "They're with me. I brought them home. They're fed, warm, and safe." She covered her face with trembling hands and wept. "I thought I'd lost them. I thought they'd be taken or hurt. I failed them." "No," Trevor said firmly, gently prying her hands away. "You didn't fail them. You fought to your last breath. You held on long enough for someone to find you, and for them to be found. That takes more strength than most people have." She studied his face, eyes glassy. "Why would someone like you help us?" Trevor hesitated, searching for the words. "Because no child should sleep on a park bench wondering where their mother went. And because I was one of those kids once, emotionally, if not physically. I know what it feels like to wait for someone who might not come back." Rachel stared at him, processing his words. Her breathing was still shaky, but steadier now. Trevor leaned closer. "You don't have to worry. I'm going to help you. All of you. But first, you need to rest. You need to heal." She shook her head slightly. "But my kids. They're waiting to see you," he said, smiling gently. "When you're strong enough, I'll bring them. One at a time if you want. But they've never stopped believing in you." Rachel sobbed again, softer this time. "My Ethan, he always tried to take care of them. Louis cries when he's scared, but he's got the kindest heart. And my girls, they cling to each other like halves of a whole. I was all they had." Trevor swallowed hard. "And now, they have a little more. You're not alone anymore." She closed her eyes, as if absorbing that truth for the first time. The room fell into a heavy silence, filled with emotion and quiet understanding. Outside the window, the city roared on, but in room 312, time seemed to pause. One woman had nearly lost everything. One man had walked into a park expecting a sandwich and walked out with a responsibility he never asked for, but couldn't walk away from. And 4 children, huddled together in a stranger's penthouse, were about to be reunited with the one person who never stopped loving them, even from a hospital bed. Trevor rose to his feet slowly. "I'll be back soon. With Ethan first." He's been waiting the longest. Rachel reached out and touched his sleeve. Her fingers were weak, but the look in her eyes was strong. "Thank you," she whispered, voice full of disbelief and gratitude. "You saved my babies." Trevor nodded, his voice thick. "They saved me, too." Trevor gripped the steering wheel tightly as his black SUV raced down the avenue, weaving through late-morning traffic like a man on a mission. In the back seat, 4 children sat in quiet anticipation: Ethan, 10, his younger brother Louis, 8, and the 5-year-old twin girls, Ami and Eva. None of them said a word, but their eyes were glued to the blurred cityscape flying past the windows, each child holding onto a hope too fragile to voice out loud. Trevor glanced into the rearview mirror. Ethan sat upright, his jaw clenched like a soldier, trying to be brave. Louis stared out the window, his fingers tapping nervously against the seatbelt. The twins, small and wide-eyed, clutched each other's hands tightly, their matching dresses a little faded and frayed. Trevor had seen a lot in his life: corporate betrayal, financial crashes, personal isolation, but nothing compared to the quiet desperation etched onto these children's faces. The investigator's voice still echoed in Trevor's ears from the call just 10 minutes earlier: "We found Rachel Hartman. She's at St. Luke's Hospital. She collapsed on the street 3 days ago, malnourished, dehydrated. She was admitted under emergency care, gave her children's names, then lost consciousness." Trevor hadn't wasted a second. No meetings mattered. No calls. Just this moment. The SUV skidded slightly as he pulled into the hospital parking lot. Trevor was out of the car before the engine shut off, rushing to open the back doors. "Come on, kids. She's here." Ethan jumped out first, then helped Louis down. Ami and Eva followed, holding hands like they always did. The 4 of them stuck close to Trevor as they entered the hospital. The fluorescent lights and sterile white walls made the place feel cold, but their hearts burned with anxious hope. A nurse at the front desk looked up in surprise as the sharply dressed man with 4 children approached. Trevor spoke calmly but urgently. "We're here to see Rachel Hartman. She was admitted 3 days ago. These are her children." The nurse's eyes widened with recognition. "Oh, yes. She's on the 3rd floor, room 312. Poor woman," she kept mumbling their names in her sleep. She smiled gently at the kids and pointed to the elevators. Trevor nodded and took Ethan's hand in his. "Let's go." The elevator ride was silent except for the quiet hum and occasional mechanical clinks. Eva clutched Ami's sleeve tighter. Louis bit his lip. Ethan looked up at Trevor and whispered, "She's really here?" Trevor placed a hand on his shoulder. "She's here. And she's alive." The elevator doors opened with a ding, and they walked briskly down the corridor. Nurses passed by, some giving them warm glances, others merely curious. Then they reached room 312. Trevor stopped and crouched down in front of them. "She's very weak. She might not look like what you remember. But she's still your mom. Okay?" Ethan nodded. Louis sniffled. The twins simply stared at the door. Trevor gently knocked and opened it. Inside, the room was dim, lit only by the soft morning light slipping through partially closed blinds. Machines beeped rhythmically, and an 4 hung next to the bed. Lying there was Rachel Hartman, pale, thinner than he remembered from the photos the investigator had found, her cheekbones sharp, her arms frail. Her hair was messy, sticking to her face, and her hospital gown looked too large on her sunken frame. She looked like a ghost. But the moment her eyes opened and fell on the children standing at the doorway, something miraculous happened. Her breath caught. Her mouth trembled. Then, her voice cracked, hoarse but full of overwhelming emotion. "Ethan. Louis. Ami. Eva." The twins ran first, their tiny feet padding across the floor as they burst into tears and reached for her. Ethan and Louis followed, a second behind, tears now streaming freely down their cheeks. Rachel tried to sit up but winced, too weak. Still, she opened her arms as far as she could and gathered them in as best as her strength allowed. Her body shook with sobs as they wrapped around her. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely holding together. "I told you to wait. I didn't want to lose you. I was coming back. I promise. I tried." Ethan hugged her tightly, crying into her shoulder. "We waited, Mom. Just like you said. We waited." Louis sobbed into her other arm. "We thought something happened. We didn't know where you were." The twins clung to her sides, their little bodies pressed into her. "We missed you," Ami whimpered. Rachel kissed the top of each head, her tears falling like rain. "I missed you too, babies. Every second. I was so scared you'd be gone when I came back. But you waited. You waited for me." Trevor stood in the doorway, frozen by the sheer power of the moment. Something clenched deep inside his chest, an ache, an unfamiliar warmth. He had watched deals worth billions get signed, seen fortunes change in seconds, but he'd never seen anything as powerful as this, a mother reuniting with her children, not with gifts or grandeur, but with raw love and survival. Rachel looked up at him then. Her eyes, swollen and glassy, found his. "Are you the one who brought them to me?" Trevor nodded, unable to speak at first. Then he said softly, "They waited. I found them in the park. They were watching me eat. They told me you said to stay and wait for you. So they did." Rachel closed her eyes and let out a long breath, half relief, half guilt. "I didn't know what else to do. I couldn't take them with me. I thought I'd be back in an hour. But I collapsed. They didn't take my phone when they admitted me. I couldn't tell them." "You don't have to explain," Trevor said gently. "They're safe now. They're with you." She stared at him, disbelief and gratitude mixing in her expression. "Why did you help us?" Trevor's jaw clenched. He didn't have a clean answer. But after a pause, he said, "Because no one helped me when I needed it most. I promised myself, if I ever had the power, I'd do better. And today, I saw them. I couldn't walk away." Rachel looked at her children again, all four still clinging to her. Her eyes filled with tears again, but this time not from fear or shame, these were tears of release. Of gratitude. Of knowing she wasn't alone anymore. Trevor stepped back to give them space but remained close. In the silence, the machines continued to beep steadily, almost like a heartbeat reminding them that life, despite everything, was still moving forward. For now, they had time. For now, they had each other. And for now, that was enough. That night, as he tucked the four children into guest bedrooms that had never known laughter or toys before, Trevor felt the weight of guardianship settle in, not as a burden, but as a vow. Ethan had chosen the room with the large window overlooking the city. He had asked for books and a desk, and Trevor made a note to stock the shelves tomorrow. Louis, quieter and more guarded, had chosen the room closest to the hallway. "In case Ami and Eva get scared," he'd said. The twins, inseparable even in sleep, had demanded they stay in the same room. Trevor found a pair of identical beds in the mansions and used East Wing and promised to repaint the walls pink by the weekend. They had fallen asleep clutching matching stuffed bears he had bought on impulse at the hospital gift shop. Trevor stood in the hallway, watching them through the open door. For a long time, he didn't move. Just listened to their even breathing. Rachel had trusted him, despite her shame, despite her fear. And he would not fail her. Downstairs, his assistant had left the final version of the guardianship paperwork on the marble counter, with Rachel's shaky signature in place. Trevor picked it up and stared at it. A temporary guardian. A stranger turned protector. But somewhere inside, he already knew, some things weren't meant to be temporary. Some bonds, once formed, don't break. Especially when they're forged not by blood, but by choice. The weeks that followed brought a quiet but profound transformation. Rachel remained close, recovering day by day at the clinic in Midtown that Trevor's foundation partnered with. Her body, once frail and worn down by weeks of malnourishment and stress, began to regain strength. But it was the light in her eyes, dimmed by fear, exhaustion, and guilt, that took longest to return. Every time Trevor visited the clinic, she would ask the same thing, "Are the kids okay?" And every time, he'd smile gently and reply, "They're better than okay. They're safe. And they miss you." Ethan, the eldest at 10, had surprised Trevor from the very beginning. He was quiet but observant, always watching, always listening. Louis, just 2 years younger, had a mischief in his eyes that reminded Trevor of his own brother, the one he hadn't spoken to in nearly a decade. And the twins, Ami and Eva, were inseparable, communicating in half-whispers, shared glances, and little giggles that brought warmth back into the cold, silent halls of Trevor's penthouse. That penthouse had never known laughter before. Now, it echoed with it. Trevor hadn't planned on becoming a temporary guardian, much less a stand-in father figure to 4 children he had met near a park bench. But when he tucked them in at night, Ethan sleeping with one arm protectively over his siblings, it felt less like charity and more like purpose. Every morning, Trevor made sure they ate a real breakfast. Not just cereal or toast, but fresh eggs, warm pancakes, even strawberries, Eva's favorite. At first, the children seemed hesitant, unsure if it was all real. Ami clutched her spoon like it might vanish if she blinked. Louis kept glancing over his shoulder like someone might take it away. But slowly, with each passing day, their shoulders dropped, their eyes brightened, and their small voices filled the home with life. The most emotional day came when Trevor personally enrolled them at an elite private school uptown. He could have had an assistant handle it, but this felt different. Important. As they walked into the office, Ethan looked down at his worn sneakers, his voice barely a whisper. "We've never gone to a real school before." Trevor knelt beside him, resting a hand on his shoulder. "Well, you do now. And you belong here." It took convincing the school principal, of course. Paperwork was complicated, but Trevor had never lost a negotiation in his life. And he wasn't about to start now, not when these kids needed stability. The first morning of school, the children were dressed in crisp uniforms, navy blazers, clean white shirts, and shining shoes. Trevor had bought each of them a new backpack. Ethan chose dark green, Louis picked red, and the twins insisted on matching pink ones with unicorns. Before they stepped out of the car, Eva tugged at Trevor's sleeve. "Will Mommy be proud we go to school now?" she asked, eyes wide with hope. Trevor didn't answer right away. His voice nearly caught in his throat. "Yes, sweetheart," he said finally, his hand brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "She already is." When Rachel was strong enough, Trevor brought her to visit the new apartment he'd secured for her and the children. It wasn't extravagant, but it was safe, warm, and filled with everything they might need. Rachel stood in the doorway, her hand to her mouth, silent tears rolling down her cheeks. "I don't deserve this," she whispered. "You do," Trevor said firmly. "You fought for your kids. That counts more than anything." Rachel took slow steps into the living room, running her fingers across the couch, touching the framed family photo Trevor had printed from a snapshot at the park. It showed all 5 of them, Trevor sitting on the grass, the twins in his lap, Louis holding a juice box, and Ethan smiling faintly beside him. "I didn't think anyone would care," she said, still in disbelief. "I didn't think I would either," Trevor replied, his voice quieter than usual. "But I do. I care a lot more than I thought I could." In the days that followed, Rachel began spending afternoons with the children after school. The first time they saw her outside the classroom gate, Ami and Eva screamed, "Mommy," so loudly it drew the attention of the entire street. They wrapped their arms around her legs, refusing to let go. Louis, ever the protector, stood beside them proudly, his hand gripping hers. Ethan hung back, his expression unreadable. Trevor noticed and walked over. "You okay?" he asked. Ethan shrugged. "What if she leaves again?" Trevor crouched next to him. "She won't. And even if she needs help, we're not going to let you feel alone again. That's a promise." It was that promise that changed something in Ethan's eyes. Not all at once, but enough for him to reach out and take his mother's hand. Evenings became family time. Homework was spread across the kitchen table while Rachel prepared simple meals, macaroni and cheese, baked chicken, sometimes even stew from a family recipe she remembered from childhood. The penthouse had been Trevor's world of silence and solitude. Now, it was alive with activity. One night, as Trevor was about to leave, the twins rushed over in matching pajamas and begged him to stay for bedtime stories. He hesitated, but only for a moment. "I guess one story won't hurt," he smiled. Ami brought him a book about talking dogs. Eva climbed into his lap. As he read aloud, Rachel stood in the doorway, arms folded, watching with tearful gratitude. Trevor didn't see her cry, but he felt the warmth in the room, something he hadn't known he missed. There were hard days too. Days when Rachel felt overwhelmed with guilt or exhaustion. Days when Louis acted out in class or when Ethan clammed up and refused to speak. But each time, Trevor showed up. He didn't fix everything. But he was there. And sometimes, presence was more powerful than any solution. Healing wasn't a straight line. It came in waves. A laugh here. A bedtime hug there. The way Eva sang to herself while brushing her teeth. The way Rachel gently scolded Louis when he tracked mud into the house. It was real. It was messy. But it was theirs. And it was working. By the end of the third week, the children no longer flinched at kindness. They no longer asked if the food was really for them. They spoke freely. They smiled more. Even Ethan had started cracking quiet jokes when no one expected it. Rachel sat with Trevor one evening on the rooftop, watching the sun go down over the Manhattan skyline. The city pulsed with life below them, but up here, it was quiet. "You saved us," she said. Trevor shook his head. "You just needed someone to see you." She looked at him then, really looked. "Why did you stay?" He was silent for a long moment. "Because I was tired of building things that didn't matter. And this," he gestured toward the laughter floating up from below, "this matters." Rachel sat on the edge of the rooftop garden, her hands loosely folded on her lap, eyes lost in the skyline of Manhattan bathed in the orange hues of late afternoon. The breeze tugged softly at her sweater, one Trevor had insisted she take from the guest closet weeks ago when she was still recovering. Though the city buzzed around them, she heard only the distant laughter of her 4 children below, Ethan, Louis, Ami, and Eva, playing on the grass just beyond the patio's edge. Trevor stepped outside quietly, carrying 2 mugs of tea. He placed one beside her and settled into the chair opposite, taking a moment to follow her gaze. "They're getting louder every day," he said with a soft smile. Rachel turned her head slowly, the weariness still present in her eyes, but softened now by something gentler, hope. "That's a good thing, right?" she asked, her voice carrying a vulnerability Trevor had come to recognize. He nodded. "It's a very good thing." For a moment, silence settled between them. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was full of meaning, of everything they had endured to reach this calm. A month ago, Rachel was lying unconscious in a hospital bed, her body collapsed from exhaustion, her children sleeping in a park. Now, she was alive. Her kids were safe. But she still didn't know how to build a future from the pieces. "I've been thinking," Trevor began, tracing the rim of his mug, "about the work we do through my foundation. Rachel looked at him, guarded. You've already done so much. He held up a hand gently. Just hear me out. We've been trying to expand our community outreach program, emergency shelters, food distribution, crisis counseling. It's growing fast, and I need someone grounded. Someone who understands what it feels like on the ground level. Someone with real empathy, not just a fancy degree. Her eyebrows raised slightly, confusion lining her features. You think that's me? I know it is. Rachel looked down into her tea, blinking hard. I used to run a coffee shop. That's the extent of my management experience. And yet you kept 4 kids alive for nearly a year without a home, without support, without losing your soul. That's more than some executives in my building can say. She laughed bitterly, but it was more out of disbelief than humor. That's called surviving, Trevor. Not leading. He leaned in, his voice steady and sincere. Rachel, when I brought Ethan, Louis, Ami, and Eva to my place, I did it because I couldn't walk away. But this is different. I'm offering you the chance to rebuild your life. Not with a handout, but with purpose. You've lived the kind of pain we're trying to ease in others. That makes you uniquely qualified to lead. Rachel's eyes glistened. You don't know how many nights I sat in that park, shaking from the cold, wondering if I was failing them. If I had made the worst mistake by coming to New York. She paused, her voice cracking. And now you're asking me to run something in your name? I don't even recognize myself anymore. Trevor set down his cup. You don't have to be the woman you were before, Rachel. You survived something most people can't imagine. And you did it with grace. This isn't charity. It's a job. One you can grow into. We'll provide training, a mentor. You won't do it alone. For a long moment, Rachel stared at him. She saw not the billionaire who wore custom suits and sat in penthouse boardrooms, but the man who sat with her children at breakfast, who knew which twin hated crust on her sandwich, who had taken time to show Ethan how to tie a tie even though he was just 10. You really believe I can do this? She whispered. Trevor didn't hesitate. With every fiber of my being. She looked out again toward the kids. Ethan was holding Louis's hand, trying to get him to climb a low tree branch. The twins were dancing in circles on the grass, holding daisies Ami had picked from the planter boxes. They were smiling. They were safe. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Rachel didn't feel like she was failing them. I don't want them to grow up remembering me as the woman who always begged for help, she said softly. Trevor reached over, gently covering her hand with his. Then let them remember you as the woman who rose. She covered her mouth with her free hand, overwhelmed by emotion. If I say yes, what happens next? You'll meet with our foundation director next week. I've already spoken with her. We'll start you off managing the emergency relief program in Queens. You'll oversee 2 staff and coordinate with local shelters. Part-time to start. Flexible hours, so you're with the kids. She let out a breathless laugh. You've really thought this through, haven't you? I've had time. Watching them, it made me realize something. I spent years building towers, but I never built anything that really mattered. Not until now. Rachel wiped at a tear before it could fall. You saved my family, Trevor. He shook his head. No. You saved them. I just happened to be in the park at the right moment. The rest, you did all that. She sat up straighter, something shifting in her spine. Then maybe it's time I stop just surviving. He smiled warmly. That's the spirit. They sat there a few moments longer, finishing their tea as the sun began to sink lower in the sky. When Rachel finally stood, she walked toward the children. Ethan saw her coming and ran first, followed by Louis. The twins squealed with excitement as they hugged her legs. What's going on, Mommy? Ethan asked, sensing something had changed. Rachel knelt and pulled them all into her arms. "We're starting something new, sweetheart. Mommy's going to help other families like ours. And you know what? I think we're going to be just fine." Trevor stood behind them, hands in his pockets, watching the scene unfold. He didn't say a word. But in his heart, he knew this was the most important investment he had ever made. The sky was painted in soft hues of gold and blush as the sun began its descent behind the skyline of Manhattan. The spring breeze carried a scent of budding flowers and fresh-cut grass, rustling gently through the trees of Central Park. It was the same park where everything had started, where a man in a tailored navy suit took a hurried lunch break, and 4 hungry children waited quietly on a bench, holding on to nothing but hope in each other. Trevor Langston stood in silence a few feet away from that very bench now, months later. His once meticulously styled hair had grown slightly longer, a little more relaxed, and his expression held a softness that hadn't been there before. In his hand, he held a sandwich, plain turkey and cheese, wrapped neatly in parchment paper. It wasn't from some upscale cafe this time. He'd made it himself that morning, something he now did often. His eyes fell on Ethan, the eldest of the 4, now almost 11, sitting confidently beside his younger siblings. Ethan still had that protective instinct in his eyes, but it was no longer out of fear. Now it was out of pride. His shoulders sat a little straighter. His voice, when he spoke, was steadier. Next to him sat Louis, almost 9, quiet but observant. Louis had once clung to Ethan like a shadow, wary of everyone and everything. Today, he chuckled at a joke that only his twin seemed to understand. Ami and Eva, twins almost 6 years old, sat cross-legged on the bench, their hands full of half-eaten sandwiches. Their dresses were light and colorful, clean, pressed, and twirling in the wind as they giggled. Ami's blonde hair was pulled into 2 buns, while Eva's was tied back in a ponytail with a sunflower clip Trevor had bought her the week before. The sisters were almost inseparable, their joy contagious. And then there was the boy who had once broken Trevor's heart with a single look. Max, the quiet child with hollow eyes, was gone. Trevor's chest tightened as he watched Max, now full of life, now named Ethan, bite into his sandwich with delight. There was mayonnaise on his chin. Crumbs tumbled into his lap. And he smiled. A real smile. Trevor had forgotten what that had felt like, to witness joy this pure, this unaffected by the world's cruelties. He walked closer, and the children looked up. Ethan stood and brushed his pants, still practicing the manners Trevor had taught him. "Hey, Trevor," he called out, smiling with confidence. "Hey, champ," Trevor said, his voice catching just slightly as he ruffled Ethan's hair. "You all enjoying the sandwiches?" "They're amazing," Louis said, his mouth still full. "You put pickles in mine like I asked." "I remembered." Trevor smiled. "How could I forget your very specific sandwich requirements?" Eva jumped down from the bench and ran toward him. "I saved you a bite," she said, holding up a slightly squished quarter of her sandwich with pride. Trevor knelt down and took the soggy corner with great ceremony. Delicious. Just like a Michelin star chef made it." Eva beamed and returned to Ami, who was already halfway through drawing a smiling sun in the dirt with a stick. As Trevor sat down beside them, the breeze shifted and carried a memory with it. The empty bench. The children's wide, hungry eyes. The words that had pierced his soul, "Mom said to wait here for Dad." He hadn't known then that his world would change. That the concrete and steel empire he built with his own hands would mean less than a single moment with 4 children on a worn park bench. He took a slow breath and turned to Ethan. "Do you remember this place?" he asked. Ethan nodded. "Yeah. This is where we met you. I was really scared that day." Trevor's jaw clenched slightly. "I know." Louis looked up. "Do you think Mom would have come back?" Trevor paused before answering. Rachel, his now close friend and the children's mother, was healthy again. She was managing a non-profit outreach program, living in a safe apartment just a few blocks from Trevor's penthouse. But those early weeks, when she'd been in the hospital recovering from malnutrition and collapse, had left deep scars. "I think she tried," Trevor said honestly. "And now she's working every day to stay with you guys, to be strong again." Ami looked up. "She said we were brave." "You were," Trevor said. "You still are." Ethan's gaze settled on the sandwich in his hands. He studied it for a moment and then looked up at Trevor. "You know, that first sandwich, it felt like a miracle." Trevor chuckled, though his eyes welled up. "I think it was, for all of us." There was a silence then. Not awkward or heavy, just thoughtful. The kind of silence shared by people who had gone through something life-altering together. A jogger passed. A mother pushed a stroller. Life went on as usual in Central Park. But for Trevor and the 4 children around him, this wasn't just a park. It was the birthplace of their story. The spot where hunger met kindness, and kindness grew into family. Eva tugged his sleeve. "Can we come here every week?" Trevor smiled. "Every week, every month, whenever you want." Ami asked, "Can we bring sandwiches again too?" He nodded. "Of course. Maybe we even bring extras next time, for other kids who might be waiting." That made all 4 of them fall silent for a moment, considering the idea. Louis whispered, "That would be nice." Ethan added, "Nobody should have to wait that long for a sandwich, or a dad." Trevor felt the weight of those words hit him squarely in the heart. He wasn't their father, not by blood. But he had filed for permanent guardianship just 2 weeks ago. And the way the kids ran to him each morning, or how they whispered goodnight before falling asleep just down the hall from his room, told him what he needed to know. They didn't need a man who shared their DNA. They needed someone who stayed. And he would. Always. As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in strokes of lavender and amber, Trevor rose from the bench. "All right, team," he said, clapping his hands. "What do you say we head home? I think there's ice cream waiting." "Ice cream," the twins squealed in unison. Ethan and Louis jumped up, sandwiches forgotten. Trevor laughed, picking up Eva while Ami raced ahead. But before they walked away, Trevor turned one last time toward the bench. His eyes lingered on the worn wood, the memories etched into it not by time, but by love. He whispered a silent thank you, to the park, to fate, to whatever force had brought him here that day. Then, holding Ethan's hand and with the other 3 children circling him like stars around a planet, Trevor Langston walked home, no longer alone. He had 4 reasons to stay grounded now. And they had 1 reason to believe in second chances. A simple sandwich, a park bench, and a promise kept. Forever. We'd love to hear what you think. Drop a comment below and rate this story from 10 to 100. Tell us where you're watching from too. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story. And if this touched your heart, check out more uplifting videos by clicking on the end screen now.